Okay, good morning, Mary Ann.
Good morning, Leora.
I'd
Thanks.
like to start with just a brief introduction. So I'm Leora Alderson, founder of bestboomersandbeyond.com. And our guest today is Mary Ann Hauser. And she's an amazing woman, a baby boomer. And so often, usually we start out with something that's not normally done in polite society, and that is sharing our age. So do you mind sharing your age?
I do not mind sharing my age. I'm 55.
Okay, awesome. So am I. I was born in 59. That's right. We were the same year. And April, what was your month?
August. August.
August. So is that a Virgo or a Leo?
That's a Leo.
Awesome. My husband is a Leo.
Many times I'm true to my Leo form.
I'm very familiar with Leo. Excellent. And one of the things, so you and I met a few years ago at the Piedmont Club. I was giving a presentation, and it turned out that so it was like a business club and a business engagement. Was authors were speaking, and I was one of them. And we discovered that you and I were also going to the same gym at the time because you were living in the neighboring town of Kernersville. I live in Walkertown, North Carolina, near Kernersville and Winston-Salem. And so you and your husband Kurt were just getting going on a number of different, very interesting and exciting things. So I really look forward to getting into these. I know that it's going to need to be more than a one-part deal because you guys are so interesting and live in a fascinating life. But so I would like to start, though, and if this works for you, with what you did in your first career, essentially. If you could say, I guess your corporate world may have been more than one, over the years. And the cool thing about these days, obviously, is that people are living longer, working longer. There are more opportunities than ever. And so we're often doing more than one thing. So what did you do during the bulk of your career, the first half of your life?
Well, the first half of my life, I actually started.
Wait 1 second, Mary Ann. The sound went off again. 1 second. Let me just check that. Okay, it's showing good on my side.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, can you say something again?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, no, okay. I don't know. Let me just unplug the speaker. The sound won't be quite as good. Try again.
Hear me now?
Yes. Okay, so hopefully that'll be good for the recording. I must be having a short in my speaker, so I'll turn that off. Okay, so back to what you were doing the first half of your career world.
I think, my career started out on a path that someone else set for me. My dad thought that women should be secretaries and administrative assistants or nurses. And I didn't know enough to disagree or argue. And I started my career as an administrative assistant in several different companies when I was younger. And I realized very quickly that that wasn't enough for me. And so I worked really hard to move beyond that kind of role and challenged myself to get a job in marketing in a specialty chemical firm. I was working there in a clerical capacity and really, you might even say badgered the vice president of marketing for an opportunity. And he finally said, if you can be this persistent in what you want for you, hopefully you'll be that persistent in helping us grow our business. And he did take me on. He was my first mentor, my first true mentor. His name was Baron. And he had the personality of a baron. He taught me a lot. And from there, he allowed me to enter a world that was the world of specialty chemicals in the early 1980s. It was a man's world, and I was one of the few women. And I learned a lot from being in that position. Then I took a break. I did that for actually 15 years, working in different capacities in marketing and business development and specialty chemicals.
Mary Ann, can I interrupt for just a second? What kind of specialty chemicals would that be?
The division that I was in microelectronic chemicals for the printing industry. So it was the early days of inkjet printers and copiers. And we developed those for large companies like NCR Corporation and Siemens and Canon copiers. So we were the chemical company that developed the inks and toners that went into those kinds of machines.
Okay, cool.
And so again, all of our clients were men, all of my colleagues were men. There were very few women in that role back then. And I look at that as actually a plus. I kind of learned how to play in that role and in that world at a young age. As I said, I worked for that company and with those folks for about 15 years. And then it became time to try the mommy track. And I had children, and I was one of the very few, or early on, not stay at home moms, a working mom. I think I probably purchased one of the first subscriptions to Working Women magazine. And I guess when second son was about to be born, the company was relocating. It was just the right time to stay home and be a homemaker. I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and it was time to get back to work once my second son was going back into school. And so we got back into the marketplace, and I entered the world of pharmaceuticals in New Jersey, again in a marketing role. What I didn't say in the beginning of this is I didn't have a college degree in those days, but I worked really hard to be as honest as I could without giving that information as much as I could.
Right.
And again, I got a job in marketing in a pharmaceutical firm in New Jersey. And I did that for about a year or two when an opportunity came up to come to North Carolina and work with a German pharmaceutical firm who was sort of, really working hard to get established in the United States.
And let me just interject for a moment, because I have a similar situation, and I ended up in sales and sales management with RJR Nabisco. First it was Lifesavers, then it was merged with Planters Lifesavers, and then it was Nabisco, and then it was RJR Nabisco. And I also didn't have a college degree, and I was probably one of the last hires of that era that didn't have a college degree. So when you and I were doing it, it was sort of like at that in-between place where you could slide in under the radar if you were willing to work hard, if you were a self-learner, and if you took initiative and that sort of thing, then, those things could be overlooked.
And I almost feel sad that you can't do that anymore, because I think a lot of people have the capacity to really bring value and bring a different, not the cookie cutter answers to corporations, if they could be a little bit more open
Yeah,
about.
well, I totally agree. I'm totally on board with that alternative education kind of thing. Well, we've homeschooled our kids, so I know that you're familiar with that to some extent. So that's it. I think we can have that topic another time, because what addresses that is entrepreneurs and
Mhm.
freelancing, which is totally your world too now. So we'll get into that more later. But yeah, I think that when corporate hiring of not degreed people fails, then they go and do their own thing and often prosper. So,
And I don't want to put down not having a college degree. I mean,
yeah.
I think I was about 45, well established in the pharmaceutical field here in North Carolina. I couldn't hire someone if they didn't have a degree. When the dinner conversation turned to where did you go to school, I used to break out in a cold sweat that I'd have to admit to somebody that I didn't have a college degree. So around age 45, I decided I was going to go back to school, and I did an online program, and I got my degree in marketing and loved it. I mean, it allowed more, the online degree allowed a whole lot more introspect. It allowed me to go out and do my own research and answer the questions that were posed in a way that was uniquely me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I loved going to school. I mean, my Sunday afternoons were locked in my formal living room, where a room we never used normally, and just sitting there and learning and self-teaching. And it was probably one of the best times of my life.
Awesome. Yeah. So,
And so it took me about 3 years to finish my degree, and I was doing that while I was running the U.S. division of the U.S. marketing division of a pharmaceutical firm. So that required me to travel not only all around the U.S. but all around the world, and that's why I had to choose an online program that allowed me to log in whether I was in an airport in Frankfurt or whether I was in my living room, and that was absolutely life-changing for me. And I did it so that I could hold my head high, not because I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. I shared with my CEO just so they could help with some of the finances. But for the most part, I kept it to myself. It wasn't something I wanted to celebrate for anybody else. It wasn't that I wanted anyone else to know it. I wanted to know that I could do it. And so I did finish with a 3.9 grade point average, which I was really proud of. And it was wonderful because I could apply everything I learned at the time I was learning it. So I think if I could recommend a way for somebody to go to school, I would say maybe hold off on your college education until you're in a place when you can apply it, because I think it was so valuable.
yeah, I totally agree. That makes sense. And I would add to that, because our education track for my family has primarily been alternative. So, see, the thing about the degree is that it's relying on the system to say, we have decided that this is what's required for you to know, for us to sanction you with this certification, this degree. And it may or may not be what actually suits you for your needs. For you, what you did at the time was perfect, and that you were able, like you said, to actually apply, study, apply. And
Mhm.
that's what a lot of, but the thing is today, the world is at our fingertips relative to learning and programs and all sorts of things that, you know, it's up to us then essentially to decide, especially as entrepreneurs, whether or not the degree is needed or whether we just need more learning and application regardless of the degree.
Yeah. Um, and so, that made me a different person. I believe it did. It just gave me a little bit higher level of confidence. Not that I lacked confidence. It just gave me that boost that if I can do this while I'm running a company, while I'm a mom, while I have kids, while, life is happening, I can tackle anything.
Yeah,
And
because
then,
yeah, you had that, you felt, because you felt you were lacking that, like you said,
mhm,
if it came up in a dinner party, so then it removed that burden from you of feeling less than just because of that technicality.
yes. And it then, and it took a while before I even told anybody that I had gotten my degree and that I finished. It wasn't until I left corporate America and started the beginning of my new career, just about the time I met you, that I finally became comfortable to say, you know what, I got my degree when I was all grown up.
Yeah.
And I still remember what I learned. And, like many kids in their 20s, I was usually very sober when I was taking my lessons.
Right.
Can't say always. There was a time or two when a glass of red wine got me through, but I really enjoyed that whole time. And just about the time I was finishing, it was when the economy was taking a dive. It was 2007, 8, I think I graduated, and pharmaceutical industry was struggling. One of the brands, you mentioned some of the brands that you marketed. One of the brands I was responsible for helping market was Mederma skincare for scars. That was one of the non-prescription that people would be familiar with the names. And it's so funny. The word scar comes up so much in my life today, working with business owners, and I keep thinking, it's not, I help them remove some of their business scars and some of the personal scars that got them to a place where maybe their business is struggling. And it's not all that different from what I was doing when I was removing people's physical scars post surgery. But so, there's always that play on words. Life is so ironic.
Yeah.
Um, Again, that the company I was working with was struggling to reinvent itself, and it was buying some new businesses. And my position was going to be relocating to California back around 2008. And we talked about me moving. We discussed salary. I pretty much made it clear that I didn't want to relocate and leave North Carolina. I had done a lot of sacrificing with my family in order for my career, and this was not one I was going to do. And it worked out great. They gave me a wonderful severance package. It happened at a time when my mom was in her 90s and needed me to be there. She got ill shortly, I mean, literally 2 days after I left my corporate job. And I got to spend an entire summer or 2 months prior to her passing at her bedside, really reconnecting. So that was
Oh,
absolutely
perfect.
wonderful for
Yeah.
me. And I would have never been able to do that had I been part of corporate America. And then
Right.
after she passed, that was in April, I spent the rest of the summer thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah.
Because I knew I hadn't grown up yet.
Right.
And I knew that I was good at business. I knew that I was good at building brands. I knew what my strengths were. And yet I didn't want to go back to the corporate world. So starting my own firm as a business coach was just the perfect fit for me. Um,
But
and I don't
Mary Ann, let me interrupt for just a minute to ask. So when you say it was the perfect fit, had you yet discovered ActionCoach, which is the brand that you ended up training with?
No, I actually had a neighbor who was an ex-minister who was, I think for a while he taught at the Center for Creative Leadership, and he had started his own business executive coaching firm. And I sort of counseled with him for a while about my career, and he actually offered to give me training in his methodology and allow me to do what he was doing. He was a wonderful man named Joe Judge, and he traveled a lot. He was away from his family. And I
So,
had just
so that's
stopped.
another mentor that you fortuned upon, right?
Yeah, he was a neighbor. And, if I think back on my life, I want to say he might have even was a year or two younger than me, but what an inspiration this man was. Just the way he handled his family and family crises, which no matter who you talk to when they all look like they have a perfect life. Everyone has a family crisis.
Right.
And, I watched him manage struggles and manage his family and help me raise my children and give me advice on raising my boys. And he was wonderful.
Awesome.
But he also traveled a lot. And if there was something in his life that he would have changed, it would have been his, the amount of time he had to spend away from his family doing what he did. So it was actually serendipitous that at that time, Action Coach actually found me. And I don't know if it was because I was doing just the right search words on Google. I'm not exactly sure how the license holder for Action Coach in Greensboro found me, but he found me at a point in time when that's exactly what I was looking for. And I'm sure it had something to do with the search engine gods. And once I looked at the points of culture for Action Coach as a firm and how they believed that how they believed that you were only going to be able to counsel someone on business if you owned a business, and that they were going to give you the tools to make you really good at what you did, but they were not going to select for you the way you run your business. And so Action Coach gives you the education. And I apologize, but I had a pop-up on my screen.
That's okay.
Action Coach gives you the education to take what you know from your inherent education in your business career and apply it in a way that makes it impactful, and there's a system to it so that you're not, and there are times I can be ADHD. So having a system and a process to follow allows me to be a better coach. Action Coach is enough for me, but it also sometimes is too much for me. When I meet with clients, I at any given time tackle 10 to 15 businesses in helping them achieve their goals and their growth goals. But with that comes everyone's issues and concerns and personal crisis. And because you can't run a business without allowing your personal life to come in. And although I'm not a trained counselor, I find that oftentimes I'm in a counseling role. And in order to do that, I realized that I needed something else. I needed something that wasn't all about business and numbers and finance and being better at what you do. I needed something that was a little more freeing. And Kurt and I have a farm in the mountains, and we purchased that while I was in corporate America, but we decided to turn that into another business, one that allowed us to be outdoors, enjoying the air, growing something that wasn't about bottom line numbers. It was about growing something in the earth. And so we have a separate business that's about raising black Perigord truffles.
Can you repeat that? Raising black
Perigord truffles.
Perigord truffle.
They are a gourmet mushroom, typically grown in France and in Europe. And it's a new market in the United States. We haven't had our first truffle yet. It takes 7 to 10 years. So it requires patience, but I figured I had some time to play outside and wait for our first truffle. And we are in about year 6.5. So hopefully in the next year or two, we will see our first, the efforts of our work and see our first crop.
Now that, and about the time that we met, you were fairly new. In fact, I think you had just recently acquired some truffle hunting dogs. Is that right?
Well, we don't own our own dogs just because we are back and forth between Winston and the farm. I don't want to leave an animal that doesn't have somebody to care for it. And we wouldn't be able to care for it. We actually rent a truffle dog. Okay. And there's a woman who has the most amazing business of her own, and she raises and trains truffle dogs and brings them to different orchards. And although she said in the beginning she does it for money, she said, but once this starts to take off, she's more than happy to bring her truffle dogs around and barter for wonderful truffle and wine dinners.
Awesome. So you have your farm in Virginia, right?
Yes.
And so you travel to and from Winston for work, for your Action Coach work part of the time.
Yes. And that's about 3 days a week.
And it's about, what is it, about an hour and a half or 2-hour drive?
It's just under an hour and a half. And I think we go right past your beautiful mountaintop every day. And I think of you every time I see Pilot Mountain.
Cool. So, and do you guys, you and Kurt, your husband, listen to audiobooks or catch up on business conversations, some of both when you're in your travels?
Yep. Well, Kurt does the driving almost all the time. I rarely drive. I use that time mostly to read, because I believe that if you're not reading at least a chapter a day, you're missing a huge void in your life. So I use it to read. We listen to audio books at times. Um, I subscribe to Success Magazine, so once a month we pop in the Success CD to listen to what everybody else is doing. Um, Action Coach also sends about 3 or 4 times a day, seven, they call it our 7 in 7, and it's 7 really uplifting practices that each coach that is successful uses to make their business better. And so every other day there's a 7 in 7 video that I watch and Kurt listens to. Of course, he's not. Hopefully he's got his eye on the road. But yeah, we make the best of that time that we can. Absolutely.
So, so now back to the truffles for a minute. Can you spell the name of that truffle?
It's a black Perigord,
Okay.
Perigord truffle.
And so, how did you get into discovering the possibility of doing truffles, of growing truffles?
Well, I may have actually misspoke a little earlier. The truffle business actually started before the Action Coach business. I was coming back from a trip, and I think it was actually the last trip, one of the last really interesting trips I took was to Istanbul. And I was on a long flight, and I stopped in a airport uh, frequent flyer room to just relax and unwind in between flights. And I picked up a magazine, and I have it sitting home, and I can't think of the name of it. I will before the end of this call. But there was an article in there about the truffle industry in France and how they were struggling because of some recent droughts, and second and third generation truffleiers didn't want to carry on the business. And we had just purchased the farm, and my husband was a stay-at-home dad. While I was traipsing around the world with my career in pharmaceuticals, Kurt raised our 2 boys, and they were getting older and heading off to high school. And I said, why don't we find something for you to do? Something that you can really own. And so I handed him the magazine about the truffle situation. And I said, see if it's even something that we could grow here. And he did a little bit of research and actually found that the National Truffle Growers Association meets in Winston-Salem in the
Oh,
United
wow.
States.
Wow.
And the meeting was coming up in another month or two from the time I handed him the magazine. We registered, we attended the conference, we learned what we could about the process of growing. We spoke to all of the other folks who were brave enough to invest all that time and energy and wait 7 to 10 years for their first crop, because I think that takes a unique set of patience skills. And we really loved the people we talked to. And now that we do a couple of other things with our farm and we're getting a little more involved in agra, I think the thing that I am attracted to are the people who are agra focused, have a different aura about them. They have a different presence about what's important in their life than the folks in corporate America. And I love my colleagues from corporate America, but there's an enlightenment, I think, that comes from working in the earth and working on a farm that is different from when you're working in a glass building.
Absolutely. I just, in fact, finished editing a blog article I had written for the My Trainer Fitness brand, which I also am founder of. And the article is about titled "Take It Outside." It's actually coming up. We're releasing a new version of our website, so it's not available right now. But by the time we post this, it probably will be. But at any rate, it was the concept of how we get so far removed from nature and natural, from the ivory tower and the conditioned air and the stiff suits, that we begin to don personas that aren't really natural to ourselves as well. I mean, it's backing away to your fear of people discovering you didn't have a degree or whatever, and yet you knew that you were a fully capable and intelligent woman. So when we start to, it's like the societal memes that tend to impose, like with your father, for instance, it begins so young, the indoctrination and the training and the conditioning of what constitutes being a good person, having a good life, being recognized, whatever it is. And all of that removes us yet another step and another step from nature, from what's natural, from ourselves. And it seems that what you're describing, as we return to nature, we return to the farming and the natural kind of environments, it seems like that's where truth is, that we can begin to reacquaint ourselves and rediscover, begin to remove, just as we shed the layers of the stiff clothing, from the suits and ties, that no one's very comfortable in anyway, and we go and put on just ourselves in a way.
Hmm. Yes. I think, before we even started the orchard, I would get up there and I would garden. And there's some crazy rock song called I Love Dirt. And my son played it one day and said, Mom, this song reminds me of you. And I found that there was so much noise in my head. I was having this crazy conversation that didn't make any sense. And that the only time I could make that stop was when I was gardening and digging in my flowers and planting new flowers. And so I am not as fit physically as you, Leora. That's one of the things I think I strive for when, and I'm getting better. But people used to say, well, you're involved in any sports? I'd say, yeah, I do extreme gardening.
Yeah.
I, I hike in the woods and I pick plants that I can transplant that I think are pretty, that I want to put in my front yard, that I can see every time I want to see them. So I've gotten some nasty bug bites doing that. So that's why I called it extreme gardening.
Yeah.
But that has actually changed who I am. Having the farm has physically changed who I am. When I was in corporate America and we purchased it, it's an uphill walk to the front door. And I can remember being out of breath, and then there's these big cement stairs to get up to that front porch. And I was exhausted just walking across the front entrance of the farm and up to the steps. And part of my goal was I want to be able to run to that front door and not be out of breath. And, it's our farm is on a hill. So you're always walking up or walking down. And
Excellent.
that in itself, knowing that I have to be a different person, even just to live where I'm living, was an inspiration. I mean, every step along the way has changed a little bit about who I am since I left corporate America.
That's awesome. That's really a strong testament. Are you running to the front door yet?
Yep. Oh, all the time.
I love it. Hills. In fact, we talk about that too in some of our articles. But hills are so healthy, to walk up and down. And when you're talking about you're not as fit as I am, kind of thing. And it's funny because since I started the fitness business, I suddenly didn't have as much time to exercise. So, it's like this kind of thing. But as you know, being an entrepreneur and an action coach and doing all the other things you're doing, entrepreneurs and are the ADHD side of ourselves. We're really good at creating lots of extra work for ourselves, even when it's not just busy work, but productive work, which can get in the way of, kind of a life at the gym. And yet the good news is that it's actually healthier for you to be active throughout the day, doing extreme gardening and whatever else for all of us, than to spend an hour at the gym. So that's the good news,
Mm-hmm.
to really rev it up to the next level. Sure, we need to do some of the gym work and the weightlifting and that sort of thing, but you're also lifting things at the farm. So a lot of what you can do, and you probably have been incorporating that, is just become more aware of how you can use your body to get more exercise with everything we do. So for instance, I was filling the coffee carafe with water to go in our Keurig machine, and I was leaning on the sink while I was filling the thing, and I thought, okay, here I go again. I need to hold it and not lean in the sink. So just simple things, or when you're carrying buckets of manure or water or soil or whatever it may be, we carry them with our muscles rather than let it dangle from our sides, bearing on the structure, on just our structure. So that, there's just so many. Or when you squat to plant, to be
Yep.
squatting as opposed to bending over, or if you are bending over, then to do it with an awareness of posture, and straight back, and pendulum at the hips. There's so many different things. In fact, we should probably create a gardening workout.
That's not a bad idea.
Literally just how to use your body while you're doing those things, in ways that give you a much, bigger return on your investment of the time and the effort. So anyway, I think, it's amazing that you're doing that you've seen the improvement you're seeing, and you are transforming physically, emotionally, and mentally as a result of returning to the earth, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. When the 2008, 2009, 2010, people kept saying I was laid off, I was let go, and those words were so confining to me. I was like, they were so negative, and I didn't like them. And I heard someone say, "Oh, you were liberated from corporate
Yes.
America," and so I started using that term instead of the economy, and I didn't want to blame anybody. You've heard me speak. I don't like the whole blame, excuses, denial. So I was liberated from corporate America. And I think just using that word liberated in my head allowed me to be liberated. And it wasn't a conscious thing, but it allowed me to be liberated enough to open up and do things that I wouldn't normally do. And we haven't even touched on the fact that we now are producing vermicompost up at the farm. It's a third business we've recently started. And when you were talking about
I know.
posture, we harvest the castings and separate them from the worms so that we can rebed these worms again. And it's a spinning process of spinning this big wheel that's sorting the worms from the castings. And I am so conscious now when I spin that, how I stand and what my posture is. Because if I slump while I'm doing it, my back hurts. But if I can stand erect and do it, I can do it all day long.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. So yeah, and I definitely want to get to that, but to get back to the truffles for just a minute.
sure.
So because one of the things that, for instance, my husband and I also have acreage, as you know, and so we've investigated right now. For instance, we're doing really well on our Pilot Mountain property with blueberries and goji berries. Do you have any goji berries yet?
We do not, but we just met another local farmer about 2 weeks ago, and he's out of the country right now, but we're scheduled to meet with him the first week of November, and he does goji berries.
Great. Well,
I think he's got several hundred acres, and
wow. We should
big crop for him.
we should connect offline after interview to learn more about
Absolutely.
that from you and from him, because we're definitely interested, because it's growing very well in our area. They're very expensive, very rare to find fresh. It's a great treat. It's almost like a bridge between a tomato and a berry, so it could actually be used in salads as well as just eaten raw, but they're very high nutrient dense. Plus you can dry them, and they grow really well in our area, the North Carolina, Virginia area. But the point is, we were also investigating things like what kind of crops, instead of planning for retirement, how about planting for retirement? And so it's a book I would like to write titled Planting for Retirement. And I definitely want to include people who are doing that, like you and Kurt. And so the mushrooms would be one example. So what I'm going to ask you in a second. So one of the other things we investigated, for instance, was ginseng and golden seal. And those are longevity crops like the mushrooms, where it takes, 5 to 7 years. So patience and diligence, and yet again, it's an investment.
Yes.
So I'm sure you've done your research, though, on what are the ranges that people tend to, what's the return on that investment financially from what you've investigated?
It's not a huge investment financially to plant your initial crops. We did 2 acres, and I want to say it cost us less than $10,000 to plant all the trees and put in the irrigation.
Oh, hang on just a second, Mary Ann, it locked up.
Of energy. My husband spends a lot of energy. The biggest component of work that goes into it is trimming the trees every autumn, going into spring.
Mary Ann, you froze up for just a minute. So one of the things you told me that I'm not sure we captured on the screen just now is that you need to plant a certain kind of tree for
Yes.
truffles to grow around that tree. Is that right?
It's a symbiotic relationship between the fungus that's on the root and the root of the tree itself.
What kind of tree is that?
We have 2 different kinds of trees. They grow on nut tree. They can grow on a lot of trees. I mean, even some pine trees can get a truffle underneath them. But the best trees for black paragourd are oak or filbert, which are hazelnuts. And
if you do
you have to,
filbert, then you get the nuts and the truffles.
well, you get a little bit of nuts, but we prune it back so much that you don't get the crop that you would if you were, if you were growing the tree for nuts. But we did get, this year we had our first nuts, and you have to have fruit on the outer part of the tree before you can actually see a truffle, from what I understand. And so this year my husband came in and said, honey, here's a handful of acorns and hazelnuts that came out of the orchard. So I know that we're on the right track. We're doing the right things. But there's a lot of work that goes into pruning those trees in the autumn and in the winter after harvest.
And is that they have to be pruned to keep a certain amount of light available for their truffles? Is that the deal?
Yes, and to make sure that the energy goes to the roots and not to the branches that are producing nuts. We want all of the energy to be going down into the roots of the tree. So when we purchased the trees, they were already inoculated with the proper fungus, which is called tuber melanosporum. And so that's why our orchard is called Tuber Nut Orchard. It's tuber because of the fungus, and nut because it grows on nut trees.
Okay, cool. Super Nut Orchard.
Yes, that's the name of the farm. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that this year will be the year that we at least see what they call a cinnamon truffle, an early truffle, which is not as firm and hard as one that you might be familiar with, but we'll know that once we start to see these cinnamon truffles, they're called, that we're on the right track. And I think this is the year.
Now, so truffles are very expensive. I've never personally bought or cooked with them. Have you?
Yes, we cook with them as often as we can. Sometimes we'll buy a truffle oil, although when you buy a truffle oil in the store, it's really not a true truffle, because I've tried to make truffle oil and I learned the hard way. I spent a lot of money on some expensive truffles and ground them and infused them in a beautiful extra virgin olive oil. And they were wonderful for about a week or two, and then they started to turn rancid. So the oil and the truffle together doesn't keep. If you want to preserve a truffle, you're better off making a truffle butter and then freezing it.
That makes sense.
And you can actually store a truffle if you bury it inside a lump of butter and put it in your freezer. It will keep for not a super extended period of time, but a month or so, and then you can take it out. And then, of course, your butter will have that wonderful truffle essence as well, if you can use it in a risotto or something like that. But a truffle about the size, smaller than a golf ball, was the last one I bought. And I got it at a very good price. It was about $80 for that small truffle.
$80?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And we turned half of it into truffle butter that we then froze and used for probably it was through the winter season, so it was for the next month or two. And then we took the other half, and some of it was shaved on top of a beautiful steak dinner with a little bit of some of it added to the gravy. You don't cook with it like you would a traditional mushroom. It's very, very potent, and it's very exotic, earthy flavor. It's more earthy than a traditional mushroom.
So when your truffles come in, where will you sell them to? Do you already have your market distribution outlined?
The company, or the gentleman who sold us our initial trees, he's been involved in the truffle industry for years here in the United States, and he will buy them back. He distributes them.
Oh, cool.
So at about half of market value. So market value goes anywhere from $700 a pound to $1,200 a pound. So if we just said if the market happens to be at 1,000, I can sell it to Garland Truffles for probably close to 500. But if I wanted to sell direct to restaurants here in Winston, the chef at the Piedmont Club says he'd be interested in buying some. And the last few years of my corporate career, I traveled quite a bit extensively across the United States and had the privilege to eat in very good restaurants. I would often ask to see the chef and have collected business cards through that time, saying, I might not be ready for another 5 or 7 years, but let me have your card and we'll reach out. So we will do some direct selling for a higher margin, but I think the majority of our truffles will be sold through a distributor.
Yeah, very cool. And so what are the ranges that you find that truffle farmers tend to generate from their crops annually?
Well, in the United States, there's only a few that we know of that are producing, and I'm told, so this isn't true fact, but I'm told that the farmer who I bought my truffle from last year, that he had approximately 1/10 of an acre, and he got 40 pounds. Now, to me, that would be a bumper crop because we have 2 acres. So if 40 pounds could sell at retail at $40,000, and that's 1/10 of an acre, we would be very, very happy.
Yes.
If we had that yield. I think that the first couple of years your yield is a lot smaller, but I wouldn't be surprised that our 2 acre lot, when it is finally up and producing, that we can produce anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 worth of truffles.
And that would be an annual thing. So in other words, do they continue to grow year after year? You don't have to,
Yes.
once you harvest, wait another 7 years.
Nope, you have to, every year after that. You do have to monitor the pH of the soil. It likes a high pH. They grow really well in areas where the soil is very limey. If there's any limestone centers in your area, then you have a much better chance. We actually supplement our soil with lime to make sure that we keep the right pH. And then, of course, you have to prune the trees. But other than that, they'll come back every year. You just have to a little, farm love. Make sure that you're out there talking to the trees every.
Yeah.
And they'll continue to produce.
Well, and some avenues for your selling could also be places like the Whole Foods and Fresh Market, as well as restaurants. in the area,
Mhm.
because they like to buy from local folks. The Jolo winery there in Pilot Mountain, they have gourmet kinds of meals and foods. Of course, that would be a smaller account, but I would think a few select accounts would be worth the extra direct versus the wholesale.
I don't think that it will be hard to get rid of them. And with the advent of the internet, I'm sure that once we are producing, the marketing will actually be easier,
Yeah,
easier
definitely.
than some of the things that we're marketing right now with some of our clients. And the good thing is I'm learning through everything I'm learning with Action Coach,
That's
working
right.
with all these independent business owners on helping them get through their struggles and taking the process from Action Coach. I can apply that now to any business I decide to run
That's absolutely right.
and make it more successful. So,
Right. So let's get to, in the time that we have left, we'll try and keep this one to an hour so that we can come back and do a part two. And maybe even, my ideal version would be we come to your farm with cameras and get some actual video of some of it, because we'd like to see it too. So we'll put that on although let's see, probably the best time of year would be summer or spring, right?
yes, spring and summer is beautiful. When some of the fruit trees are blooming, when the apple trees are in bloom, it's usually very, very pretty.
Yeah. Would that be April?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so we'll put it on the calendar to try and schedule for April then, definitely. And
I would
maybe we'll
love
get
it.
to do another conversation before then. But so one of the things that conceptually, I find your story fascinating. I love people's stories. I love their journeys. But one of the things too I want to help people who are listening connect with, and that is that we don't have to have it all planned out in advance. That a lot of it's what I call walking through each open door of opportunity. um, Take a look at the scenery of that room, and if or that farm, and if it works for you, then keep pursuing it. You kind of have an idea, but the main thing is not giving up, not retiring from life, but rather engaging more fully. During the second half of our life, I can't imagine you, for instance, ever stopping learning, creating, doing new things. And nor for myself, I never could imagine why I would ever want to retire, because I love creating, producing, and learning. And so I'm always going to be doing that. So have you gone through any phases in your life where it felt hard for you to push through to the next level, or has it always been kind of an easy engagement for you to move to the next thing?
I think that everyone goes through struggles where it's hard. I and if you sit and you say, "Oh my gosh, this is so hard," um, it will be hard. And I always say you have to allow yourself a certain amount of time to feel sorry for when you made the wrong decision, or you've gone a little too far down that wrong path that was the wrong room, and maybe didn't look at it with your eyes wide open. You can only say, feel sorry for yourself for a short amount of time. And everybody needs that. I think you need to sit down and say, woe is me once in a while, but don't let it consume you. Don't let it take over who you are. Make sure you get those voices in your head, and we all have them. Put them back on a positive track, and um, discuss what it is you're really looking for. Talk to people who know better than you. Find a mentor, find a coach. I'm a coach, but I have a coach. I have several. Um, you need help, and you'll go down the wrong path, but just, you know, give yourself a couple of minutes and then get right back on the right track. It's the only way to do it.
So and begin to, by doing that and by having that attitude of not getting moving beyond the, okay, we can sit on our pity pot and then we get off and get going, right? So and part of that getting going is like, okay, well, this is what we're doing, but it's a balancing act between setting a course and going that direction, and at the same time being open to other opportunities. And I think that entrepreneurs get really skilled and adept at that, but if someone is just starting out and for them it's hard to even imagine what they might start to do. So it would be starting with an interest, something they're interested in, start in that direction, and then become more aware and open to opportunities. So for instance, there you are at the farm, and you're doing truffles, and you're doing Action Coach, teaching people about business, and you're blending them together. And how does the idea of earth and worms come up? And you decide, you see the opportunity and you see the need by virtue of looking for it yourself, right?
Mhm. And once you're starting to look at things that interest you, I mean, I never, if anybody told me I'd be raising worms, I would have said you were crazy. I was born in Midtown Manhattan. What am I doing raising worms? Um,
Right.
but when your eyes are open and you're looking for things that fit, I said to you earlier that I started to talk to people in the agro world, that whole aura about who they were was so much more attractive to me, that the worm people were the same way. You know what I mean? It was all about, we're not raising worms to raise worms. We're producing vermicompost that will allow organic farming to thrive in a way where you can still have these wonderful plants and you don't have to put pesticides on them. And so it just went back to the heart of who I am. And part of it was to sustain some income between now and the time the truffles actually get into full production. It's something we can make a little bit of money on in between. And then it again will allow us to have some finances in our retirement that won't, we're leveraging what we have now so that it will be able to support us when maybe we can't be as active as we are
Right. Investing in yourselves.
today. Yeah. It's an investment, and boy, we've made our mistakes with that as well, but it's all about learning. Now I'm learning all about what the pH of soil has to be and what the carbon to nitrogen ratio of fertilizers is in order to make it sustain your plants. Every day I learn something new about. I would have never thought I would understand the science behind soil, but that's one of my latest ventures of education.
Yeah. So your key words there is every day I learn something new.
Mm.
And so anything that we think that we couldn't do or wouldn't understand, the difference is, and the successful entrepreneurs are those that are always willing to learn and try something new and to keep that journey going and to not take failure as no.
Right. Failure's just, you might have taken that wrong fork in the road and get back on the path and find the right way to do what it
Right.
is you're trying to do.
One of my favorite books, I wrote a review on it for on best. Are you there? You locked up for a second. I'm not
You're
sure.
locked up. I can hear you, but your
Okay.
video is locked up.
Okay. The lockup will probably, there it goes. We blipped off of that one. The book is Mindset by Carol Dweck. Have you read it yet?
I think I have. Yeah, I think I read it about 3 or 4 years ago. But is because there's a couple of books called Mindset, and I can't recall the author. Is it the one that's sort of written from an education perspective?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, she was a researcher, or maybe still is, at Stanford, and researching a lot of the learning processes, and that kids that tended to be naturally bright tended to um, become afraid of failure. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, and if you tell kids, oh, you're so intelligent, you begin to reward that, then they tended to fear setting themselves in circumstances where they might fail, because
Right.
then that might indicate that they were no longer intelligent. That she calls that fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Growth mindset are those who learn that it's the effort that should be rewarded, and they're commended for their effort. I can see how hard you tried. It's clear that you put a lot of work into that, etc. And then back to the programming of our times, and that we're not even aware of, that runs the tapes of who we are. That it begins way back, even as children. So it's the concept. If you have that growth mindset, that what I'm doing and that failure doesn't mean no, it doesn't mean I'm bad at this, it doesn't mean never to do it. It just means, oh, okay, what happened and how can we do it better?
Yes. In fact, that book was given to me by a nephew of mine by marriage. It's my niece's new husband, and he's working towards becoming a school principal. And he gave that book to me when he saw that I was getting involved in Action Coach. And as I read it, I was thinking, gosh, every educator should
Yes.
read this, and every parent should read this.
Yes,
Yeah.
that one, and also a Multiplier by Liz Wiseman is an outstanding book for teachers, educators, and parents, and anyone who, like managers, employers, that sort of thing. Anyone who has any employees, anyone for whom or around whom they're a leader, because it really is about learning how to multiply the strengths in people. When we focus on their strengths, that's what multiplies and grows, versus the diminisher kind of leader, which focuses and harps on the weaknesses. So those two
Mhm.
together are really powerful for anyone leading people.
I don't know that I have read Multiplier, but I'm going to write it down right
Yeah,
now.
Liz Wiseman. There's one other author, but she's the first one, and that'll get you to it. It's outstanding. It's Mary Ann, I've already taken a good bit of your time for today, but and we'll put your websites on the interview, on the link, on the summary of the interview that I post, and I'll let you know when it comes up. But if you could say again the name and site for your vermiculture, do you have a site for your truffles yet, or is it just going to be under the farm
We have
name?
a site right now that's got a little bit of information on the truffles and the vermiculture, and it's just under development, but I think you can still pull it up, and it is tubernut.com, so www.tubernut.com. And then the Action Coach site is coachmaryann.com.
CoachMaryAnn.com. Okay. Reserve battery power. Oops, and well, that was my battery power warning. So it's good timing. So to close for today, is there any kind of parting thing from your wisdom of, reinventing yourself on a regular basis? Because it seems to me like you've just walked into it naturally, not even with a conscious thought of, now I'm going to start this whole thing all over, but just been sort of, it seems like a very natural process for you.
I think the only wisdom I would get is when you have negative thoughts about, I had left corporate America, and what am I going to do? Get rid of the negative thoughts, do whatever you have to do, repeat something positive, read an uplifting book, but don't let the voices in your head take over. Yes. And the minute you free yourself from that fear, you will be able to find the things that you can be passionate about that will also sustain you. And awesome. It's not about having more stuff. It's just about having the right stuff.
That's awesome. That's excellent. That's a great note to end on. I thank you. We've locked up again, but I think the voices are still there. We'll be coming back.
I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you so much for your time. This is wonderful. You know what I love about this is it's like we had a chance to have a cup of coffee together, even though we haven't seen each other for a while, and get to catch up. So thanks for sharing yourself, your businesses, your endeavors, your adventures, and your wisdom.
And thank you for including me in this process. I think it's an absolutely wonderful venture you're on, and I can't wait to see all the other videos from the other folks you've interviewed.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks. Talk soon, Mary Ann.
Take care.
Bye-bye.